Hey everyone, it's me, Andy.
And I'm Sean.
And this is the Commander's Brew.
This week, Volrath mutates.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the Commander's Brew here on YouTube. We got a big new deck tech for you this week, and if you want to help us out, quick thing to do is just to hit subscribe. And if you want to get involved more directly, of course, you can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/commandersbrew. Go on over there, get in on the Discord where we actually brew these decks and more. You can link up with people and actually play, whether it be on Spell Table, Magic Online, all that kind of stuff. It's all over there on the Patreon, patreon.com/commandersbrew. Check it out. But let's get into this week's deck tech. This week's deck tech is the genesis of it is really an interesting place because I was playing on Spell Table with our good friends Ryan and Zach from Commander Social, and we played just the straight up, just the precons from C20, C20?
21.
C21?
I forget what number.
I don't know which one it is. Maybe it's 20. Maybe? Anyways, doesn't matter. The most recent precons, right? That's all that matters. So we were playing with the precons, and I just happened to grab the mutate one, and I was happy to do this because, first of all, love playing with those guys. It was great, but I hadn't played any of these precons yet, and I realized that since because of the pandemic, none of us really got to get into a room and play these together. Like we usually like to try and get at least one game of just precon Commander out, right? So we managed to do this over the internet here. I grabbed the mutate one because I was just very interested in to see how it would work, because it kind of seemed like it would be tough, right? Because it's you're stacking on, and we've done a couple mutate episodes here where we took a couple of the mutate commanders from Ikoria, and we built decks around them that weren't based on mutate, right? These were based on just having them as commanders and how viable they are as separate commanders, not simply building around that ability. And it turns out they were actually really good. They were a lot of fun. But I was intrigued by actually building around mutate, and as I was playing the deck, I was having fun. I was losing a lot, simply Ryan having a Niblis of Frost that just tapped down my whole stack of creatures every turn was for sure making me lose. But I was still having a fun time playing with this deck. So then I started looking at I just want to maybe upgrade this deck into something better, and then that made me think let's do it on the show, and let's do it not just simply an upgrade, but a little bit more to it. So here's the other twist of this story. So I on my the day where I started brewing. So usually what we'll do is we'll put the idea into our Discord, and I'll usually have a pretty sizable group of cards I know I want to use, right? Because I've already got the genesis of this idea, and we'll say to the Discord, and then people will come, and then they'll give other ideas, and they'll give cards names and so on and so forth, and we'll brew it all in there together. Well, I had just finished typing what I wanted to do for the deck, and then my wife comes out and is like, okay, you ready to go? And I was like, I forgot I had to go right now. It's like, oh guys, okay, I'll be back in a bit. I'm sorry. So I left. And then of course, I was running errands, it ended up being almost the whole day. I came back at 6 or 7 o'clock from doing that in the afternoon. And then of course these patrons of ours had brewed this whole deck together, of course. So I was like, well, I simply can't take credit for this. I didn't brew this deck at all. So when it comes to the part of this where we name the patrons, this was a very big effort on their part. Now I did actually put my own spin on this. I didn't just take their whole list, because they're when they're giving cards and everything, it's there's no one keeping track of how many cards we're putting in the deck and stuff like that. So when it came time for me to look at what was there and everything, it was obviously just way too big. So we had to make some cuts, we had to make some changes, and so I ended up going with this. So I'm very also interested to hear what our patrons are going to say about this deck, because this is pretty sizable cuts. So what we decided to go with here, and again, this was my idea from the start. This is what I gave the patrons, and then they kind of help Brew with it, is the idea of a mutate deck where we clone our mutated stack, and then we get value from that, whether it be, because one thing I found was that like I've put all this effort into my mutated stack of creatures, and then someone's just tapping it down, right? Or someone just removes it and that's the end. But if we clone them, right? If we have a couple clones down, copies, then the original stack that's no big deal. Now we can just clone other things, and then it just gives us more options for our mutate creatures that we have in our hand. This was the basis of the idea. So I saw this commander and I thought it was great. The Discord also, they came to the conclusion that this was the commander, so I'm really happy that they landed on this. The commander for this one is going to be Volrath the Shapestealer. 2 black, green, blue, so this is a Sultai Brew. 7/5 legendary shapeshifter. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature. And then you can pay 1 generic, and until your next turn, Volrath the Shapestealer becomes a copy of target creature with a counter on it, except it's a 7/5 and it has this ability. So notably, we don't want many, if any, humans in this deck. Volrath's not a human, so that's good. So he can be mutated upon. However, Volrath is also just a great clone himself, right? He can come down and because there's a lot of synergy built in this deck where we're going to have counters and stuff, Volrath will easily be able to copy our stack of creatures. Now, the Discord went in a way where it was a really neat way, a really cool thing, where they had a lot of legendaries to mutate onto to make them not legendary. And then they would copy the legendary creatures and have like a bunch of different legendaries, which is an amazing.
That's so cool.
It is very cool. Now, here's the reason I didn't go with it. That's the part of it I cut out, which is like, because it's tough to get that sequence right in consistently, right? Because you need to get that creature, which a legendary creature is usually 4 or 5 mana, generally speaking, if not more, and then you have to mutate on top of that, and then you have to have the clone to do it. So you need to have like all 3 parts of that. Now your commander, especially in this case, isn't a mutate creature. So if we had a mutate creature, at least you could kind of always have one of those. In this case, we have Volrath, but then with Volrath, we still need we're either putting a -1/-1 counter on our guy, or we have some other things. So there's a couple of things that need to line up, and I thought, once I had everything in front of me, like the full list of cards, I was like, if we actually just cut like a bunch of these legendaries, we still get this amazing stacked giant mutate creature. They just don't have like, I don't know, the ability that like the Silumgar dragon has when you attack, you -1/-1 everyone. It's like, okay, that's a sweet ability to have, especially when you have it in multiples, but it's not something we ended up, I think we ended up making a bit of a leaner deck as a result. But let's get into it, okay?
Sure.
So let's start setting the scene, and let's start talking about what we're going to mutate onto. I think it's key in these decks to have something with low mana cost. We want a creature on board that we can quickly mutate onto, especially if you've got something like the rampant growth guy, the migratory greathorn. Like you're going to want something on turn 3 to be able to mutate onto there. So I think it's very important for that. So Sean, why don't you take the starting the stack, we're going to call this.
Okay, some early stack contenders. Young Wolf, single green for a 1/1 with Undying. When this creature dies, if it didn't have +1/+1 counters, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. I'm going to think through with mutations. If you've mutated onto this and it undies, the things will come back not mutated together. They'll come back as individual cards.
Correct.
But that's still great value. And the interaction with Volrath, we get to put a -1/-1 on Young Wolf to get rid of the +1/+1 so that it can undie again. We can reset undying things with Volrath if we chose to.
Also, everything will come back with a +1/+1 counter separately. Because it sees all of those creatures as having undying. This was this was a late edition. Oh, I'm so sorry. Someone said that I'm probably gonna read the name of the person who did this in the chunk of names, but
Sure.
This was an edition from one of our patrons that was like, his whole deck was around this. So it was a great interaction, which I just couldn't not include. It's so good.
Okay, so Slippery Bogle, Bogle.
Yeah.
It's a single Simic hybrid, so either a single green or a single blue for a 1/1 hexproof beast. Quite simple. No one can touch it, and as you build the stack up, it retains that hexproof, so no one can mess around with it. That's great. And in the similar vein, Silhana Ledgewalker, 1 and a green for 1/1 with hexproof. Again, your opponents can't target this whole stack. Silhana Ledgewalker can't be blocked except by creatures with flying. It's kind of unblockable. Flyers also traditionally have smaller stat lines, so even if your opponent has something that can block, our stack of Ledgewalker will probably be able to outclass it.
I like how this creature, Silhana Ledgewalker, is actually better than her version of flying is better than flying because Reach can't block this. Very interesting.
Right.
Very weird.
Right.
So these are some kind of traditional mutate targets because of the hexproof, because of the evasion, and I mean the cool interaction with Young Wolf. So let's just name just a few of the mutate creatures we're like pretty excited to have it in here. So first, we've got Brokos, Apex of Forever. 2 black, green, blue. It's the Sultai 6/6 legendary from Ikoria. Nightmare Beast Elemental. It mutates for 5, so 2, a hybrid blue black, and 2 green. So you only need 2 of the 3 colors, one of them being green. I always forget that when I'm trying to mutate. So just remember that, like, you don't necessarily need blue, you don't necessarily need black to mutate Brokos. He has Trample, and you can cast it from the graveyard using its mutate ability, which is really helpful in this deck. Just getting a 6/6 Trample is obviously fine, but the ability for us to always have access to Brokos is really, really awesome. Then we have Souvenir Snatcher. This is one from the Commander deck. 4 and a blue for a 4/4 bird. Mutate for 5 and a blue, so it's 1 more to mutate it, it's pretty rare. But it has flying, and it says whenever this creature mutates, gain control of target non-creature artifact. Very helpful in Commander. And finally, we have Mind Leecher, 4 black for the 5/5, mutates for 4 and a black. Another flyer. These are all very important. The flying is really, really great on these. Whenever this creature mutates, exile the top card of each opponent's library face down. You may look at and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. So that'll give you just a little access to, whatever it is, whether it be some kind of removal, another creature, whatever. So Mind Leecher is just a sweet one to have. These are just some nice, and then there's a whole stack of the uncommon and creatures from Ikoria that are in the Sultai colors, and those are just they came in the precon. And I think for any deck that's centered around Mutate, you're going to at least use 2 of those colors, and they're probably going to be the blue-green ones. You can swap in red a little bit if you wanted to switch colors up, but I think generally Sultai is where you want to be when you're mutating. So there's a whole generic stack of those to use in addition to these great ones. So now that we know what we're doing, we got our stack set. We got to make the stack with these creatures. Let's take a look at the neat moves.
Working on a
Neat.
Okay, so first neat move, we talked about it earlier. We're going to clone the stack. So Sean, tell us about these 2 ways we're going to do that.
Progenitor Mimic, 4 green, blue, shapeshifter, 0/0. You may have Progenitor Mimic enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, like our juicy mutate stack, except it has, at the beginning of your upkeep, if this creature isn't a token, create a token that's a copy of this creature. So the Progenitor Mimic isn't a token, and it will copy itself into a token version. That clause just means you don't get exponentially more, but every turn you get 1 more Progenitor Mimic as long as it's not a token.
Do you know how to make things not tokens, John?
Mutate onto them.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you Progenitor mimicked your stack of mutate creatures, yeah, it's going to come into play as one of those. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, it's going to make a copy of it, which is great. It makes a single copy. But we could start really mixing that up when you start mutating onto those tokens. and making that creature be the top, because then all of a sudden that's not a token anymore as per the rules.
Goodness.
So pretty
Does it matter?
cool.
Wouldn't it be a non-token no matter where the mutate card is?
You know what? I don't know about that. I just assumed it had to be on the top because that's where the game checks for all of the like card properties, whether they be power, toughness, CMC, and all that kind of stuff. I kind of just assumed that it had to be on the top, because if you do it under, wouldn't it still just be a token with those abilities? That's what I think.
Well, I don't know what makes it a token. Nothing on a token says it's a token.
I'm pretty sure it needs to be on the top. I'm pretty positive it does.
In any case,
correct me if I'm wrong, but at any rate, this card's good. Even if you didn't have that ability, this card's still pretty sweet.
Gonna be so confusing. Okay, this original one is these three creatures mutated together.
Yeah.
This Progenitor Mimic also has this one, and its copy also has that one, but this one doesn't have that extra mutate.
It's a bit of a rules nightmare. Yes.
I love it.
There's one more notable one. Yeah.
Altered Ego X2 green blue. I love an X spell. I also love the art, the weird cartoon face yelling. It's a shapeshifter. 0/0 can't be countered. I totally forgot this had that.
I forgot it did too.
You may have Altered Ego entered the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it enters with X additional +1/+1 counters. It's a 4-mana clone at the base with green, but you get to add X to it, and it can't be countered. And you get to add counters to it, +1/+1 counters. Mutate stacks love +1/+1 counters because, Volrath loves them because that's how Volrath is allowed to copy them. But B, those counters are on top of the power toughness, so it just makes it extra huge. Altered Ego is a 0/0 with some counters, but when the top card is a 6/6 with some counters, that becomes very big, very fast.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, good point. Volrath, a little bit of synergy there, because Volrath just cares about any kind of counters,
right?
That he wants to copy. It doesn't have to be that -1/-1. So clone the stack. That's how we're going to do that. And we got a couple other clones in here too. They're just not as exciting as these two. And we're going to also copy the stack in some interesting ways. This one, Beppo gave these were some great ideas here. So first one is Spawn Writhe. 2 and a green for the 2/2 elemental with trample. Whenever Spawn Writhe deals damage, combat damage to a player, put a token that's a copy of Spawn Writhe onto the battlefield. So if you mutate onto this with, say, Brokos and make it a 6/6, and all of a sudden it can get past, some of the blockers that your opponents have, bam, now you have 2 Brokos. And again, if we put the Brokos under Spawn Writhe, and it's a 2/2, and it's not legendary, and it still gets in, then we're going to be able to copy as well, right? So manage your stack that way. You don't want the legendaries. Generally, we don't necessarily want on the top if we're copying them a lot of the time. Or if you do copy, put something on top of them after, once you want to start copying them. Very important for that.
It's tough to sell putting Brokos under Spawn Writhe.
It is.
You get nothing for it. You don't even get the trample.
So like you would want... but I mean, Spawn Writhe naturally has trample, so there's that. But yeah,
right,
you'd want like putting a flyer on this is the perfect thing. Like throwing that stealing bird thing, Souvenir Snatcher or Mind Leecher on here is perfect. Trample and flying, that's going to be tough to deal with. We also have Splitting Slime, which is a card from Conspiracy 2, I think. 3 green for the 3/3 Ooze. When Splitting Slime becomes monstrous, and its monstrous is 4 green, so 6 for monstrosity 3, meaning you put 3 +1/+1 counters on it. So when it becomes monstrous, you put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of Splitting Slime. Now, I don't know how the monstrosity rules work, but I might be wrong about this, but I think if you mutate on top of this guy after he's been monstrous-sized, I think you can do it again. I don't know. I might be wrong about that. But at any rate, you can definitely do it to the new thing you've made, which is really, that's all that matters. I might be wrong about that first thing.
My memory of the way monstrous works is this is monstrous or this is not monstrous, similar to how a card knows if it's tapped or untapped. It knows if it's monstrous or not. I suspect that if you monstrous this once, the stack knows it's monstrous.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So a copy would also know that it's monstrous.
The copies don't, because it just becomes a 3/3 The copies definitely don't. It's the you're right that if I mutated on this, I think that it knows it's monstrous. That sounds right to me now. But if you made a copy of it, it's just a 3/3. It doesn't get the counters, and that's like so. And it's not monstrous. So you can monstrous the token. For sure.
Because that's in the text.
Yeah, it says this token. The token has no
text.
counters and isn't monstrous. Says it right there. Yeah. So yeah,
Weird.
Very cool way. And then there's another neat way we can do it, which is Mirage Mirror. This is a classic 3, well, not classic, but it's a great commander card. 3 generic mana for the artifact that has the ability of pay 2 generic. Mirage Mirror becomes a copy of target artifact, creature, enchantment, or land until end of turn. A lot of shenanigans you can get up to with this. Obviously starting with copying a giant stack of mutated creatures and mutating onto it, which is neat.
Wow.
If you put it under, then it goes back to being an artifact, and it's kind of like protected a little bit. So that's kind of interesting.
Wow, that's a rules nightmare.
So what happens though when we get all these stacks? Like we're making clones of stacks of mutated creatures. Like, but at some point you're gonna run out of You're gonna run out of mutates, right? You're gonna or you're just not gonna have any in your hand at least. And at that case, a lot of these creatures just become. If it's a 6/6 trampler, that's great, or it's a 5/5 flyer. Those are good things, but like I got no more abilities to get out of these guys. If I put it on a young wolf or something, there's no ETB triggers or anything, so making clones doesn't actually give me anything else other than like a vanilla-ish creature, right? So this is something I ran into in the precon game where I was like, man, if I could just bounce one of these creatures, that would be great. So Sean, what about bouncing the stack? How does that work?
Ooh, bouncing the stack is fun. Just a little rules reminder: if you do anything to a mutate stack, you treat it like a card. So if you bounce a mutate stack, you put all of the cards in it back into your hand. And if there's token portions in there, those will vanish like tokens do when they get bounced. So let's use Crystal Shard. It's a 3-mana artifact, 3 in tap or a single blue in tap. Return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1 generic. It's super mean to use on opponents who tap out on something. You can return 1 random thing, or you can just return yours for a single blue and refuse to pay the 1. It's great that way. Mm-hmm. We're also looking about Equilibrium. 1 blue, enchantment. Whenever you play a creature spell, you may pay a single generic. If you do, return target creature to its owner's hand. That's another great way to mutate things. The errata word is whenever you cast a creature spell, casting with mutate counts as casting. Yeah. So that also applies. And then Erratic Portal, very similar to the Crystal Shard, 4 generic for an artifact, 1 and tap, return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yes, very similar to the Crystal Shard there. This is, so what you're going to do is you're going to make a copy of your stack, and then at some point when it makes sense for you, you're going to bounce the original stack back. They all come up as individual cards, and then you can start mutating back onto that stack, so you can get another instance of like the draw a card one, like the Dreamtail Heron, right? I'm going to put my Dreamtail Heron on this stack, which already has that Dreamtail Heron's ability. So now when you mutate on this, now it's going to draw me 2 cards each turn, and then I'm going to make a copy of that thing, and then and so on and so forth. So you can get really out of hand, and you don't need to do it very many times before it starts to really kind of like overrun your opponents with value, basically. So ends up being really, really great. And I think I honestly think it's just essential for a mutate deck to be able to do this, because we're kind of limited. I mean, there's a lot of mutate creatures, to be honest. There's like I think there's like 20. Less, maybe just under 20 or something like that. So that's enough, right? Like that's enough that we're going to be able to do it. But it's the keeping on doing it, the being able to continue doing it, and so on. Okay, so we have a couple other mutate targets here that I wanted to point out that have some specific nice interactions with Volrath. First is Predator Ooze. This one actually comes in the precon and is a great target. The difficulty with this one is that it's green. You need 3 green mana. So turn 3, is this possible? It's going to be tough, but we're going to be able to get it down at some point, I'm sure. It's a creature Ooze. It's a 1/1. It's indestructible, and it says whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and whenever a creature dealt damage by Predator Ooze this turn dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Predator Ooze. So we only really care about that first one when it attacks. That's all we need. And it's going to be great. Being indestructible is awesome. Next, we have Scoot Swarm. This one is actually just kind of recently getting a little bit of a notice because of Standard, because there's like a Mutate deck in Standard that uses Scoot Swarm. So 2 and a green for the 1/1. It's an insect that has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. So the thing is, if you mutate onto Scoot Swarm, and then we have 6 lands and we play a land, it makes a copy of it. Well, that makes a copy of your mutated stacked Scoot Swarm, right?
Wow.
And then those all have that ability too. So the next time you play another land, you'll make 2 copies, and that is exponential growth there. So this card gets out of hand, and it's very, very fun to have this guy on the battlefield with your mutates. It's really great. This one actually doesn't have this one's just a very sweet card. The next one does have a little synergy with Volrath as well, which is Prime Speaker Zagana. 2 green, green, blue, blue. Legendary Merfolk Wizard. It's a 1/1. She enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the greatest power among other creatures you control. When Prime Speaker Zagana enters the battlefield, draw cards equal to its power. So a 6-drop that we're going to want to mutate onto is tough, but it's nice in the late game, because if you already have your stack going and you play Zagana, she's going to draw you a bunch of cards, right? Probably, like, it's not out of the ordinary to have like a 10/10 mutated creature because of the different +1/+1 stuff we have going on. But even if you don't have any of the +1/+1 counter stuff happening, it's going to be like a 6/6 or a 7/7 or something like that, right? Or 7/5 because of Volrath or whatever. So you're going to be able to draw a lot of cards off of her. She's going to have a bunch of counters on her. And then if you start mutating onto her, then each clone of Zagana with a mutate creature on top is going to have a bunch of +1/+1 counters on them every time they come in and draw you a million cards. So as long as, again, we get rid of that legendary thing by mutating on top of her, this is going to be a like absolutely disastrous creature for your opponents to see across the board. It's going to be really, really great. You're going to draw a million cards from this one.
You're talking about when you clone or copy the stack with Zagana on the bottom, the non-legendary stack of it.
That's right.
Just to clarify, when you do mutate onto a creature, it's not a new creature coming in.
No, exactly.
So
that's
extra
right.
layers of mutate won't trigger this, but if Zagana is no longer legendary and you copy her, well, that one just came in.
Exactly. That's exactly it. So she retains that ability. The copy's going to have that ability.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for there. Now, I mentioned that like just getting a new like stack of mutates is great, but you do need to mutate onto it for it to do anything other than just be a creature, right?
Yeah.
So Zagana is a good example of something with an ETB ability. We do have our final group here is a couple of ETB creatures that are going to be nice to mutate onto and just have in general, but they're really great if we can start copying these guys as a stack. Why don't you take this?
Yeah, these are some great starters, like a good sourdough. Muldrifter, 4 and a blue, elemental 2/2, flying. When it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. Every time we copy the stack with Muldrifter in it, we will draw an additional 2 cards. You can evoke it for 2 and a blue if you just need to draw those 2 cards as in a pinch. We've also got Shriekmaw, another evoke option, 4 and a black with fear. Can't be blocked except for artifact and or black creatures. That applies to the whole stack, so that could be pretty mean. It's a 3/2 on its base, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. If your opponent doesn't have black in their deck, it will be able to destroy almost anything on their board, and it won't be able to be blocked by almost anything on their board. And again, you can evoke for 1 and a black in an emergency. And then Farhaven Elf. These ones are so fun. 2 and a green for a 1/1 Elf Druid. When it enters battlefield, search up a basic, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and that applies to the stack as we copy and clone it. Each one becomes its own tutor up a basic. I love it.
Yeah, just that ability alone is really strong. Farhaven Elf, I've decided, is my favorite ramp card of all time. Easily.
It's certainly up there, yeah. I mean, yeah.
It's just rampant growth stapled onto a 1/1 creature, 1 mana 1/1 with rampant growth. It turns out it's great.
Yeah.
So useful in so many decks, and this deck is no exception. Mutating onto a Farhaven Elf is a fine target because you know you're going to be copying down the road, And if you do, you're just going to keep expanding your mana base. It's great. So yeah, there you go. That's what we're doing. That's the whole thing. It's a lot of fun, and it's fun to be able. So like, I wanted to be able to diversify the threats, but also continuing getting all the bonuses from Mutate, and that's exactly what this deck does. This is exactly what you want out of a Mutate themed deck. I think it's a lot of fun, and if you're a patron and you want to go over and check out the cards that that I like didn't use from the Brew, there's a lot of awesome interactions and synergies going on over there with that sort of legendary take on it. I also saw a lot of teamer suggestions at like the kind of the beginning of when people were talking about. So there's actually like, I feel like if we went a little deeper with that, there's a bit of a teamer brew here that you could also go off in that direction. Mutate is not just a one-trick pony. It kind of looks like it might be, but there's a lot of room to maneuver in there. And so yeah, it's fun to go back and sort of revisit a Mutate deck. So Discord helpers, I've talked about them a lot. Apologies if I missed anyone, but I tried to get everybody in here. Braves for Robin did like kind of led the group for a lot of it. Neo Maxis also, Mattis Man also right in there. Chiefy doing a lot of work. Might makes right in there. Guy Pizza, Papadio, Beppo, as I mentioned, he came with a strong suggestion of the spawn rides and the self-copy guys. Quantum Mechanic 1, Mr. Big Bent's also helping out in there. It was like, I was very proud and happy to see that, our patrons, just came up with such a cool thing basically on their own. It was really awesome. So thank you everyone in there, because this deck would probably be pretty different without you guys. So we've done that. Let's talk about quickly. Let's talk about the budget report. Right. So this one looks like it's around $100, which is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this. Turns out Mutate is not super expensive to build around. You can definitely do it on a budget. We're talking like TCG low around $60-ish, which is not bad, and you can even get that down a little bit. There was basically the only stuff that really stuck out as far as being expensive is all that bouncy stuff. So any of the stuff Sean talked about with bounce, the Equilibrium and Erratic Portal and Crystal Shard specifically, those three cards are all over between like $5 to like $8, depending on which one you're talking about. Equilibrium's like 7 or 8. Erratic Portal, same thing. But those are nice cards. They're repeatable sources of bounce, which I think is really good for this deck. You only need to get one of them down, and you're pretty happy with it.
Could you make the budget argument that, like, in the broad scheme of a game, maybe you won't be using any one bounce so many times? Mm-hmm, so, like, perhaps we could find some flashbacky instance and get, like, if we could get a total of 6 or 7 instances of bounce, even at instant speed, that could be a budget replacement for it. Absolutely.
What I was going to say is that they're all very good because they're repeatable, but you don't necessarily need all 3 being repeatable. Because like you said, you might not even need to do it more than twice or once even. So, I would leave in Crystal Shard, which was the cheapest of them. And then you can cut the other 2. And like Sean said, like bringing back anything that has like flashback. There's a couple different blue spells that will bounce a creature and then have flashback, or not jumpstart, but something like that, right? Just a simple unsummon, right? So I think that's definitely a very reasonable way to go about it. But talk about this pricey card, which would really be an all-star in this deck. You can read this one.
Ooh, it's a commander staple. The Scarab God, 3 blue, black, legendary creature god, 5/5. At the beginning of each upkeep, this isn't even the great part. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses X life and you scry X, where X is the number of zombies. Here's what makes it so amazing. 2 blue, black, exile target creature card from any graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 4/4 black zombie. Instant speed, reach into any graveyard for 4, repeatedly, no taps. And if that wasn't enough, when the Scarab God dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So, like, yeah, this card is pushed, to say the least.
This card has it all. It has bringing other creatures from your opponent's graveyards to your battlefield. So now you can mutate onto them and get those abilities copied. You can just copy their creatures that way. You can bounce if you mutate onto this guy and someone tries to kill it. No, it just bounces all of your mutate stack back to your hand. If you get to the point where there's a couple of zombies out and you make a couple mutate copies of the Scarab God, you can also be scrying and making them lose 1,000,000 life. Like, it's got like all three abilities work especially well with this deck. So I think it's up around like $12 to $15 depending on where you look, something like that. But this is a card that if you're running a staple binder, especially, I'd get a copy of the Scarab God. It's just such great utility, and has its own what do you call it, like resiliency there with the bouncing your hand and stuff. So that's really good. Quickly, I also wanted to just mention, maybe this is something that we do from here on out, I don't know, but the MDFC count for this deck was 4. So I've got 4 modal dual face cards. Balagad Recovery. I've got the one that saves your commander for the single black, the Malakir.
Glasspool Mimic, right?
I got Glasspool Mimic in there for sure.
Nice. And
I've got the single green one that puts a counter on stuff. You could you could run more, obviously, but like we could be here all day talking about the other ones you could add. Obviously the murder, like that's one you would probably look at if you wanted to include it.
Did you count them as lands when you put the deck together? Or did you count
I did
them
my
as spells?
2-to-1 ratio thing, so I counted them as 2 of them as spells, 2 of them as lands, essentially, and then made the deck accordingly. So there's 36 proper lands in here, or maybe 35 actually, the rest are whatever. Great. So that brings us to the fancy part of the evening. So it's time to put on our tuxes, of course, in the limousine where we will get into them.
Yep.
And let's go and see the Odric Awards. Great. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for being here. The tuxes are sitting a little high today. That's fine. That's totally fine. Sometimes your tailor cuts things a little bit differently.
Every time we go to the Odrics, the fashion trends are a little bit different.
That's right.
We're keeping up with them.
That's right, exactly. And we certainly are keeping up with them by having our bow ties rest just under our mouths. Really good. I think it's going to be a hot new look. We only have one award to give away this evening, so in addition to saying hello to all the various, there's Sidisi. Oh wow, Sidisi, very nice to see you. Thank you for coming.
Narset.
Oh,
wonderful to have you.
Please don't kick anyone. That's all we're saying today. Please don't kick anyone. We have one award to give away today, and that award is the award for it's going to look weird when we mutate this guy. We cannot mutate onto humans because mutating a human into some ferocious beast would certainly look absolutely terrifying. So the award for it's going to look weird when we mutate onto this guy goes to Beast Whisperer. Beast Whisperer, I'm very sorry. You are an elf druid, and when I mutate you into a bird / ooze / insect creature, I hope you retain some form of your humanity and do not simply ask everyone you see to kill you, because I can see that possibly happening. You look like a happy guy right now being just an elf druid, but things might change for you in this deck.
It brings up the question why elves can mutate but humans cannot, but we'll address that in another...
We'll address that in another one. And you know what? We're going to say goodbye tonight from the Odric Awards. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we will see you all next week.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks for watching. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting the show by going to patreon.com/commandersbrew.
And if you want to get any of the cards from our deck list, go to our TCGplayer affiliate link below.
That helps us out too, and for a free way to help us out, consider sharing the show with some friends. Like and subscribe, add a comment or two.
See you later.
Bye.